Hey, welcome to my second Resto Druid Mythic Plus Dungeon commentary. This is for a 17 Spires of Ascension run that I did with a pug during last Tyrannical week. I'm going to do this as a bit more of a dungeon review guide. The dungeon has huge variance in outcomes in the pugs that I run, so I thought it'd be helpful to explain the mechanics from a healer's perspective and talk about how I deal with them as a Resto Druid. So this first pull is usually a big one. There's going to be a lot of healing needed in almost every case, so it's good to just get all your dots out and get your damage out as soon as possible. So I dot everything up and send my offensive Convoke. Then at this point, looking for these Burden of Knowledge casts going through. It's a high priority dispel as it deals a big chunk of damage and leaves a nasty dot. The tank's also taking big damage, so I send my Iron Bark and just start pumping healing into him. I also noticed that he has 40 stacks of Necrotic, so we're going to be thinking about how to help the tank kite pretty soon. The Goliath also has a high priority cast called Rebellious Fist. This needs to be kicked. It deals huge party-wide damage. On a high enough key, it can wipe your whole group. So definitely be looking out for that, and either using Barkskin and Bear Form to try to survive it if it's going to go off, or if you're a class that can kick, make sure that your landing kicks on that. The Vanguards also have a frontal. There are 3 Vanguards in this pull. I definitely see players get hit by this all the time, so if you're melee, make sure you're positioning behind the Vanguard so you don't get hit by that frontal. And then the Mender has a cast called Forsworn Doctrine. So this is a big heal over time spell. This should get kicked or purged if it lands on one of the mobs. It actually looks here like the Goliath may have been hit by this. You can take a look at the logs real quick. Yeah, so the Mender ends up healing the Castigator, actually. It looks like this is the recharge anima. So this is also one that's worth looking out for. So there's this Goliath has an anima resource. Let me see if I can identify it. I don't think I actually target the Goliath at any point, but if you target the Goliath, you'll be able to see a resource on the unit frame. When this depletes, they will cast the recharge anima, and you'll want to make sure that, especially on spiteful or on sanguine weeks, that you're either ready to typhoon mobs away from the Goliath if they're about to die, or the tank should be pulling the Goliath away from mobs that are low HP. You really don't want the Goliath to full heal in a sanguine puddle. Because they're immovable, you can't typhoon them out. So definitely be on the lookout for that. This second pull is all the same mobs, but there's only one of each, and it's kind of small. I actually think in this case we probably should have saved the Goliath for this pack. Just given that there's a lot of kicks in the first pull with a Mender and 2 Castigators, and then the Goliath as well. Whereas in this case, there's 1 Castigator, 1 Mender, and then potentially the Goliath. So just fewer kicks, so needing to manage. It'll just be easier to manage if you do it that way, I think. So cleaning this up, flying across. This is the first mini boss for the Tormented Affix in the dungeon. This guy has a healing reduction aura that makes you receive 50% less healing. That's this debuff here. They also have a tank bleed called Sever. I'm not tracking it here yet. I need to update my unit frames to do this, but you want to be looking out for that because the tank can take heavy damage. They also cast this AoE fear called Wave of Terror, where if you're not standing near a party member, then you'll get feared. And then immediately after, they'll cast Carnage, which targets a random party member, and then the mob will rush towards them, leaving a bleed, and applying that bleed to anyone nearby as well. So you need to group up to avoid the fear and then spread to avoid the bleed. Whoever gets this bleed is going to need a ton of healing, so make sure that they're using defensives and you're giving them Life Bloom and Send Ward. This player's in pretty big danger. So for this guy, I like to take the loose mana ability. Just not needing to drink through the dungeons is really valuable. So this pull is pretty similar to one of the first pulls. There's one Vanguard, rather two Vanguards. They're going to be doing the frontals. The Goliath is going to be doing Rebellious Fists, so you have to kick that. The Mender will cast the Forsworn Doctrine, which will heal one of the mobs, so make sure you're kicking that as well. Basically, there's 3 big kicks here. Also the Castigator. I see my tank has 31 stacks of Necrotic, so I actually drop my Ursals just to help the tank kite. I also see that the Goliath is completely unaffected by the Ursals, so I run over to him and I use Stampeding Roar in case the tank wants to keep kiting. In this case, he's able to drop the stacks, no problem. So we just clean this back up. So the first boss, this is going to be the first Bloodlust of the dungeon if you didn't end up using it on the first pack. On Tyrannical Week, I definitely recommend using it on this boss. It can take considerable time. It's a 2-phase encounter with these 2 bosses. The bosses share a health pool, so cleaving damage is definitely valuable. You don't have to tank the bird boss, but you do have to tank the humanoid mob. The bird will face a random direction and then send out this barrage, so you want to make sure that you're dodging this. The humanoid will cast Dark Lance, leaving a dot on 2 players. This deals a lot of damage. It's a high priority dispel, and then whoever doesn't get dispelled should use a defensive cooldown. The bird will also then periodically fly around, and you'll also notice this beam between the 2. Anyone that stands in the beam will get a dot that ends up stacking, so you want to really avoid. You can see the mage ended up getting 4 stacks of the dot, and then they get chunked for half their HP, and then they insta-ice block to drop the dot. So the mage did the right thing there. Our DK accidentally stood in front of the barrage and got hit. They got 1 shot, so definitely make sure you're dodging these. You can tell what direction the frontal is going to go based on the direction that the bird is facing. It's kind of hard to see here because our tank is standing inside the bird, but yeah, just looking to pay attention to what direction they're facing. And then finally, the humanoid boss will cast Overhead Slash, which will be targeted at the tank. This looks like a frontal, but it's actually a targeted ability, so you can you don't have to really worry too much about standing in the way of that. In phase 2, the humanoid boss will take to the skies and will no longer need to be tanked. The bird will fly around and continue to shoot the barrage, and then the humanoid boss will periodically throw spears, these charged spears you can kind of see around the room. Players should try to place them off to the side just so they can preserve play area. So I end up dispelling the Warlock. I actually think that was a mistake because the Mage had already used Ice Block. I guess they have Alter Time, they could have used that, but the Warlock actually has a lot here. They have their Unending Resolve, and they have Dark Pact. So I actually should have dispelled the Mage here, because they had already used Ice Block, and or actually they have Ice Block again. I guess they use Cold Snap to get their Ice Block back. But in either case, the Warlock had more tools to deal with this, so I should have dispelled the Mage. Skipping ahead a little bit, basically we just swap between these 2 phases. You want to be giving quite a lot of healing to the tank, especially when they're about to get the overhead slash. You'll also want to be giving them your Iron Bark if they don't have any mitigation available. And then there's some spot healing of the people that get hit by the charged spears and the Dark Lance. But overall, it's a fairly easy fight. You can see our our tank ran between the two bosses and got this dot here. They're taking quite a lot of damage. They're actually in pretty big danger right now. And a couple of things happen. One, they have the dot, so they're already dipping kind of low. Two, they actually don't face the boss during the overhead slash. I think they were trying to avoid it, but it's actually unavoidable. So they take a huge chunk of damage. They're down to 20% HP now. So they need a ton of healing. I use Nature Swiftness and get them topped up as soon as possible. And so now it's just cleanup. So next pull, we opt to go right. There's 2 packs of Stealth Claws here. They'll stun out of stealth, so it's worth using Flare or some AoE to get them out of stealth. They end up doing considerable tank damage, so our tank's doing a good job popping a lot of mitigation here. They end up with 40 stacks of Necrotic and end up clearing it, but even there, they end up taking quite a lot of damage. These cats also apply a stacking bleed, and so you want to be looking out for when your tank has a lot of these stacks, and if they can't kite, you should help them kite, or be prepared to use Iron Bark to keep them up. And this Praetor mob has a ability where they target a player and they dash towards them. They end up dashing through them, and they'll deal damage to that player and anyone else in between. If they're not in melee range of their aggro target, or they're the player with the highest threat, they will cast this this Darkseeker ability. That's just a ranged attack that they'll generally be casting on the tank. So this next pull with these skirmishers, this is a pretty dangerous pull. So these skirmishers, if they are not in melee range of the tank, they'll cast this hurl ability. In this case, I don't see that they're all targeting me, and they almost one-shot me. If this was a fortified key, I'd be dead. I'd be trying to respawn. The way you prevent this is by being in melee range of the mobs. So you can see here, now that the tank is in melee range, none of them are casting hurl, they're just meleeing the tank. These mobs will also disengage, they'll jump backwards, so you want to tank them with their backs against a wall. That way they won't actually have the space to disengage, and you can just keep them planted in one spot. So you can see here our tank backs away just a little bit, just outside of their hitbox, and then the mob starts casting hurl, and it's dealing pretty big damage. So this one feels really tank dependent on how the mobs get positioned. It can also be worth using Ursul's Vortex for these guys. If you can't get them with their back against a wall, you can drop Ursul's and keep them stuck in place, at least for a little bit. So this pack has our first squad leader. This mob has a frontal. It has this targeted ground ability where it'll leap and leave a void zone and deny area. They also have an aura that will reduce AoE damage taken by 75% for all of the mobs around it. It also has the highest HP, so it can be the long pull for this pull and any pull involving them, so it's worth putting priority damage into them and getting them out of the way as quickly as you can. And then there was another skirmisher, one of those hurling mobs, and a champion, which is really similar to the Mender mob before. As a Resto Druid, there's these gaps, and some of them are short enough that you can clear by using Wild Charge. This can be worth it if you're say still in combat with Spiteful and you want to get to the other side so you can drink sooner. In this case, I just did it for style points. These Ether Divers, they have a pretty fast auto attack, and they leave this stacking dot, the Insidious Venom. It's a magic dot. You can kick this, you can use AoE stops. It's a high priority dispel. So what I end up doing is I see my tank gets a couple stacks of them, but I also see the Ether Divers are continuing to cast the spell. So if I were to dispel 2 stacks, I knew my tank was going to get 2 more stacks. Or at least 1 more stack, a couple more stacks. So I actually wait for the cast to go through and then I dispel. You can also do an AoE stun on these mobs and it will reset their spell queue, and they will end up all casting at the same time. There are actually a couple of huge problems in this pull. Yeah, so one, the casts were staggered, so he ends up with 1 stack. He also ends up tanking them for long enough to get 63 stacks of necrotic. I actually made a mistake here. I should have dispelled him, and he probably would have survived. He's unhealable at this point, but he actually ends up taking enough damage from the dot to die. It was probably also a mistake to use the battle res here. The pull was pretty much over, and I don't think we actually needed the tank to live in order to have the team survive. I definitely should have saved the B-res, but the whole thing could have been prevented if I just dispelled. So this pack is another squad leader pack, so we want to be putting priority damage into the squad leader. There's also a new mob, this Inquisitor. It's actually really similar to the Castigator. It casts this spell called Internal Strife that deals direct damage and leaves a dot similar to the Castigator's Forsworn Doctrine. I think that's what that was called. Whatever the dot is that the Castigator leaves. But this one will cleave to nearby party members, so it's an even higher priority kick and dispel. We also have a Stealth Claw that was hidden among this pack. So the tank's getting quite a lot of stacks of necrotic at this point, and they start to kite. There's also a pack of Stealth Claws that's over here. If you end up going on this left side, yeah, our mage finds this out the hard way. So our tank's just taking a second to reset necrotic stacks, so now I can actually heal them. These Stealth Claws, there's only 1 pack here, so it's a bit less dangerous than the first Stealth Claw pack, because that's a double pack. But you still want to be paying close attention to your tank, because if they get a lot of stacks of the bleed, they're going to be in danger. So here you can see the Praetor using their Swift Strike. Our tank drops his Spear of Bastion, which works similar to Ursul's in that it keeps the mobs bound into the spot. So this is another great spot to be using your Ursul's Vortex to keep mobs grouped up. But in general, this is not a really scary pull. You should definitely be pretty focused on damage. Yeah, a lot of these pulls on this side are actually not that interesting. I feel like the other side is slightly more interesting, so I'll probably at some point upload a gameplay video of a run where I go with a more coordinated group and we go to that right side. The right side has a pull with 2 Goliaths, so coordinating kicks is way more important if you go that side. It's definitely doable in pugs, but maybe this side is a little bit easier. I think the right side is a little bit faster though. So I'm actually going to just entirely skip ahead to the pull before second boss. So this one has a Stealth Claw, an Ether Diver, the Champion, which will be doing the heal, the Praetor, which is going to be jumping around and cleaving your team, and then the Squad Leader, of course, who's going to be causing everything to take less damage. So this is worth using the one of the spears of that the Kyrian players can get in this dungeon, and just burning down that Squad Leader as fast as you can. Your tank's going to need quite a lot of healing, and if the Squad Leader isn't pointed in the right direction, their frontal will end up potentially dealing a lot of damage to the party. So definitely be looking out for melee that are standing in front or just otherwise in not the best position. So this is a neat trick. You can actually pull the boss and then just reset it. So just running out of the play area, the boss will disappear, and then this will give you safe passage over to the tormented mini boss that's on this side. So this is Sagadon. Sagadon's aura increases physical damage taken by 50% for all the players. He will also periodically do this smash. He'll suck everyone in and root you. As a druid, you can just shapeshift and get out of it. And then he'll cast this massive smash, which deals big AoE damage all around him. This guy's one of the easier of the tormented mini bosses. I actually think he's worth skipping in this dungeon because the final boss, the only physical damage is their run through ability, and it has to be avoided anyway. So you might as well skip this guy and save the time. I also think he has some of the worst powers. So for me, it's a increase healing on myself or the Absorb Shield. I think maybe in hierarchies the Absorb Shield is probably worth getting because every minute you'll get an extra 20% HP, but for me it doesn't seem that great. So this boss is a two-phase fight. It'll be your second Bloodlust of the dungeon. She has a couple abilities. So the first is this Dark Stride, where she teleports to a random player and applies this bleed. This bleed is going to cause a lot of damage, so this target is going to need your Cenarian Ward, your Life Bloom, and just a lot of direct healing. It's also worth pumping defensive on this. The boss will also leave this Shadow Whirl at the place where they were before they teleported. This Shadow Whirl will launch out these darts in this kind of clockwise way, and if they hit you, then they'll knock you up in the air and deal quite a lot of damage. I think our DK ended up getting hit by one of these, and it brought them down to less than 20% HP. Knocked them up, so they're out of melee, and they're not really dealing damage. They're in pretty big danger there. So it's worth having the tank position the boss like this, where both of the Shadow Whirls get placed side by side, because in the next phase, the boss will recharge, and these Shadow Whirls will emit darts in all directions. And so if you're standing far enough away, they're pretty easy to see coming and dodge. So you should definitely be ready to dodge those. The other ability that this boss has is this Blinding Flash, where if anyone's standing in front of the boss, they'll get hit and get stunned for 2 or 3 seconds. This can be pretty dangerous if there's a Shadow Whirl that's about to shoot a dart in your direction. So definitely be looking out for players that are getting hit by this. Almost no one gets hit, but it definitely happens from time to time. So you can see I'm mostly paying attention to the Shadow Whirls. I end up casting a Wild Growth just to do a mini ramp on everyone in case I need to Swift Mend or Nature Swiftness regrowth into anyone. So here I saw that my Warlock wasn't using their defensives, so I end up popping Ironbark on them. There's actually not a ton of tank healing in this fight. As you've probably seen, the tank's health has been pretty stable this whole time with no healing from me or just a rejuve. And so I'm a little concerned about our Warlock, given that their HP is at 50% and they haven't pressed a button, so I give them the Ironbark. And then on the way to the last platform, you can actually snag these angels a little bit early. Saves you a little bit of time and earns you some style points. So skipping ahead, we grab our spear and then head up to kill this Hellion. The Hellion does pulsing party damage, so it ends up being actually a pretty healing intensive fight. Our tank decides to pull the Tormented mini boss here. So this mini boss, it deals pulsing fire damage. It puts out these magic debuffs that increase fire damage taken. It periodically casts this targeted ability that you need to dodge, which then leaves fire and denies space. And then it also has a high priority kick, this Inferno, that that if it goes off, it's going to wipe your whole team. My brain is bad and goes to mush here, so I don't press a button, even though my weak aura is telling me I should be pressing a button. I guess I'm convinced that I can save us without using a cooldown, but that's a bad choice. Definitely be pressing cooldowns. The mage also kind of line of sights me on the stairs, so I have a hard time healing them, and I actually spend a lot of time just trying to get into a position where I can actually cast heals on them. So for this guy, I like to take the haste power. 12% extra haste is actually a ton of haste, and then it also ends up dealing damage to you. If I take a look at the entire dungeon, my damage taken, this anima power ends up being, a quarter of the damage that I'm taking. It's this whole period of time I'm getting chunked by this. It seems kind of scary, but I actually don't really notice it while I'm in the run. I definitely think it's worth the trade-off. I try to do the jump, but I'm not good, so I can't land it. Instead, we skip by using Lockgate and Door of Shadows and stealthing. This next mini boss is the Coldheart mini boss. This one has an aura that decreases your movement speed by 50%. It has this targeted spell that will deal high damage to that player. This player is going to need a lot of healing, so be ready to put your Life Bloom and Send Word on them. There's not a lot of tank healing in this one, so really this is your main focus, whoever gets this debuff. They have a frontal that's highly telegraphed. It deals a lot of damage and will knock you back, so make sure you're dodging it. And then finally, there's this Cold Snap ability. It's these swirlies on the ground that you should be dodging. I think I get hit by a couple of them. You can see they do a fair amount of damage on a 17, so on a higher key they could be lethal. And then this guy, I like to get the Satchel of the Hunt spell. It increases your movement speed by 30% and also buffs all your teammates' movement speed. This is great for really just speeding up the dungeon and making some of the mechanics easier. So we'll see a case pretty soon where this can be helpful. These usurpers, they're normal mobs and they just hurl at random teammates. We opt to fight them here in the middle. That's one way of doing it. a lot of groups that I run with will run over to this pillar and have line of sight behind the pillar. Usually you'll want the tank to just run through them on their mount and then stand behind the pillar, and then once the mobs are all over here, the rest of the players can come over. You can also shroud her into the skip. There's another pull. That's not very exciting. So for this boss, this is a 2-phase boss. So the first phase, there is a resource that the boss spends on all of their abilities. The first ability is this Purifying Blast, which is going to be targeted at a random teammate and leave a dot that will cleave in an AoE. Their second ability is this Imperial Ordnance. It's going to target all players and drop these orbs. You need to dodge these, otherwise they are going to one-shot you. As a Resto Druid, if you get targeted by the Purifying Blast, it's worth popping Bark Skin and going into bear form. It's just going to absorb some of the damage, and just because you have a little more HP in bear form, so that's worth doing just to reduce the healing requirement. Yeah, this is another fight where there's not a ton of tank healing most of the time. So you can see on the tank I just have Rejuve and Regrowth, and for now Wild Growth, but on the target of this I have all of my hots. This player is going to need a lot of healing, so you're really going to want to prioritize this player. At this point, I see two things. I see that I have Heart of the Wild, I have Convoke the Spirits, and the boss is low on its resource. So it's about to enter phase 2. In phase 2, the boss takes increased damage. I believe it's double damage. So this is the big DPS phase. You want to save your DPS cooldowns for this point in time. The other thing that happens is these orbs that were dropped during the Ordnance go towards the boss. A player needs to tank these, or soak these rather. In our case, we choose to have the tank do it. It's also worth, if a player has immunities like this Frost Mage, soaking them with their ice block could also be worth it. But given that it's also a DPS burn phase, having the tank do it can often be better if your players have a lot of cooldowns. And once the recharge is done, we get back to phase 1. So there was a Purifying Blast, an Ordnance, and then one thing we see, I think we saw this once before as well, the tank, if the tank enters the boss's hitbox, the boss will cast Charge Stomp. It's going to apply this debuff. It's going to deal AoE damage to everyone that's near the boss in melee. This debuff is a dot and also decreases movement speed. I ended up dispelling our tank because I was a little worried that our tank was going to be taking some damage. In hindsight, I guess I actually think I should have dispelled the Death Knight. So this is mostly uninteresting for the rest of the fight until we get near the end. We make a critical error in where the boss is positioned during the final Ordnance. So we made the mistake in that there was a Purifying Blast. This gets the boss down to exactly 25 resource. I think this is anima. The Ordnance costs the boss 25 anima. So what ends up happening is the orbs drop right next to the boss. And I realize that we're not going to be able to soak the orbs. If the orbs hit the boss gets a huge anima increase buff, so the burn phase lasts for less time. It also deals huge party-wide damage. So I immediately Bark Skin, cast Wild Growth. The first tick goes off and we all take huge damage, and then immediately just trank. Our warrior also does a great job in casting Rallying Cry. But if 1 or 2 more ticks of that go off, we are probably going to wipe. I could have done better in that I also had Flourish. I should have also casted Flourish, even though only one hot was out. Yeah, it would have been worth casting. This is also a case for just having your F-flow down all the time as well. Players that are standing in that will just get a little bit of extra healing from that Spring Blossom's extra hot. I also could have realized that that was about to happen if I was paying closer attention to the boss's resource, and I could have ramped / also positioned the final orb a little better. So these last pulls before the final boss, there's 3 mobs here, and they're all tethered. The way these mobs work is each one has a unique ability, and whenever you kill one, it's going to full heal the others, and the others will grant their they'll get the ability of the one that you just killed. So this first one, it has a frontal ability. It's by far the least dangerous one, so it's worth doing this one first, because everything can have that frontal, and you don't really care. It's very telegraphed and easy to dodge. The second one has this Charged Spear ability. So it drops a spear on one of the party members, and then it emits these projectiles in 4 directions. The way it works is actually similar to the, here you'll see it pretty well here. There's the spear, that's where the boss was. It emits these projectiles in 4 directions, and it works similar to the second boss of Plaguefall, that boss's jump ability. So the first projectile heads towards where the boss was, and then the rest of the projectiles head out in all of the other directions, separated by 90 degrees. So the longer that the fight goes on, the more of these spears are on the ground, the more projectiles you have to dodge. I see a lot of people get hit by these, so you'll be wanting to look at players that are in position to get hit by the projectiles and be ready to heal them. Yeah, on a high enough key, this will one-shot, and especially on fortified keys, it's very, very dangerous. The final mob is the hardest one of them all. It has this stacking pulsing party damage dot, and it'll also be throwing spears, and also has this kind of leap ability similar to the Hellion from before. This is a great candidate for Bloodlust and also your final Kyrian Spear from the dungeon. In this case, you can see we're at 10 stacks, so what I've done is I've actually ramped on everyone and then casted Flourish. If this boss lasts much longer or on a fortified key, you're definitely going to want to be using Flourish and Tranquility. I would even consider saving my Convoke to use for healing. But let's be honest, if we're using Bloodlust and a Spear, I'm going to DPS Convoke. So this boss is a 2-phase encounter. The first thing that happens is the Archon drops this kind of safe zone, this big blue zone here. You'll use this to not get killed by the detonation spell. The boss will then put dots out on players. You'll want to dispel one. Usually you want to wait until the player is kind of off to the side. And then finally they cast that run through ability. So they target a random player, and they that was a close call, and they jump towards it, kind of like the Praetor, and it is pretty much going to one-shot you if you get hit by it. So you have to dodge it. In phase 2, the boss flies away and becomes untargetable. These orbs appear, and you have to collect them and then deposit them in the middle. While this is happening, the main healing from the fight comes from these void zones that are sliding around. If you walk through them, you get a dot. This dot will stack. So you'll want to be ramping, spreading rejuves, using wild growth, and trying to dispel a player if they get too many stacks. And then once all of the orbs are deposited in the middle, a player will pick up the spear, target the boss, and throw the spear. And then phase 1 will start again. So one thing I like to do for these detonations is drop my F-Low, spread rejuves, and cast a wild growth right as the damage goes out. This does a pretty good job of healing everyone up. And again, this is another fight that just doesn't have a lot of tank healing, so you can prioritize just healing people up when that detonation goes off. You just spread some rejuves, pop a wild growth. F-Low can be helpful. Make sure you're dispelling these. You'll want to prioritize players that don't have a defensive cooldown. So in this case, I saw that I didn't have my my bark skin, but my DK had some personal cooldowns. He ended up using his anti-magic shield. I also ended up giving him Iron Bark because I knew the detonation was also about to go off and he was going to be in some danger. And then once the boss gets to around 30%, phase 2 will start again, and you'll be dodging swirlies and or void zones and collecting these orbs. Very similar. I end up ramping. Our mage ends up using Ice Block to just be invulnerable. At this point, no one really has a lot of stacks, so I'm kind of healing a little bit, but I'm mostly preparing to deal more damage. At this point, we have 2 minutes on the clock and no more phases. We're just DPSing the boss. The only thing that's wiping us is not standing in the Archon safe zone. So we time the key pretty easily at this point. So yeah, thanks for watching. Yeah, so this one ended up being more of a dungeon guide. I talked a little more about the dungeon than in the last one that I did. So let me know if this kind of content is more interesting, or if you want something that's like more focused on decision making as a Resto Druid. I mean, part of that comes from knowing the dungeons, and that Resto Druid requires preparing for damage. So knowing the dungeons is definitely the most important thing. But yeah, let me know if there's other kinds of content that's interesting or useful. I'm planning to do some more of these. Also, just uploading gameplay from my point of view with no commentary, either in pugs or with the team that I often will push with. And also doing some videos about UI design and things along those lines. I've gotten a couple of questions about my UI, and I know that people like to talk about WoW UI, so yeah, I'll plan to do one of those videos as well. So thanks again for watching, and take care. We'll talk soon.